So I'm going to talk about Falconhoven, which completed in summer 2020. I worked on it from when I joined the office in 2015. So the project was on site for 3 years. And as I said, it's just recently completed. I've not been to see it yet, which is interesting. So my impression of it is based entirely on these photographs and having seen it on site during construction. So a little bit of history and a kind of explanation of the project. So this is the site in the early 2000s, and the plot is in the middle. It's this 10-story hostel building, which was for just to the north of this picture is the docks in Antwerp. So we're in the north of Antwerp in the kind of historic quarter. And yeah, this building in the middle, this tall building, was a kind of hostel for ship workers. And there's also a collection of kind of industrial sheds. So yeah, and Antwerp's has been undergoing a lot of development recently. This road here is the top of the last image. So this is the kind of harbour docks area, which is full of new construction buildings by Diener and Koloff, Zaha Hadid. Everyone knows the kind of weird glass building at the top of the docks here, these towers, Chipperfield, Tony Fretton, and almost every Belgian architect has contributed to a housing project. So the site has kind of had an interesting history. It had a monastery on it at one point, which was knocked down and replaced with a barracks in the 19th century, which was in turn replaced by this Seamen's hostel. But there's this kind of interesting layering which has happened over time, where sort of the edge of the monastery wall still exists, and the kind of shape of the block has always remained the same. So the site was purchased by AG Vespa, who are the kind of municipal real estate arm of the Antwerp local authority. They purchased the site and organised a competition for the master plan of it. And this is about 2005. So the competition was won by Rapp+Rapp, and they had this idea about kind of repairing the urban block, sort of rebuilding the urban fabric and returning it to something more familiar with the kind of surrounding context, enforcing the edge of the block, removing the Seamen's hostel, which was kind of incongruous with this idea of the fabric of this part of the city. And when they won that competition, the plan was then made. Kind of became the planning strategy, this sort of BPA, and then it was broken down into further sites, which were run as separate competitions in kind of conjunction with a developer, architect and developer-led competition, where the developer would bid for the site, and so it was a kind of financial and architectural competition, but the sort of massing and program of the site was set out in this master plan in 2005. So this was the competition model, which we entered the competition with the developer, who was called CIP, and 3 other architects. So it was in collaboration with Bovenbouw, ONO and Rapp+Rapp. So at some point during the competition, we were chosen as doing this sort of big L-shaped block, and the other architects each took a couple of these smaller developments. So there's a big building which is sort of holding one corner of the block, and these sort of different multitude of buildings which are making up the edge, this kind of looser outside edge of the street. So you can see that in the plan then. You've still got the remnants of the wall of the monastery. The site, this block is broken up to have 4 courtyards, so there's sort of courtyards which are external to the block and courtyards which are internal, and then these smaller blocks have smaller internal courtyards, and these sort of they kind of feel it's about repairing the block, but also trying to encourage the variety and kind of grain of the city which is around it. On the ground floor, there's a series of, in our block, there's a series of kind of small commercial units for kind of shops or nail bars, and a community center and a kindergarten. And then these sort of passageways which are open to the public, so anyone can walk through these courtyard spaces in between the buildings. So it's very important. So this is that model photo from that I showed before. This is an elevation which is addressing the external courtyard, with these loggias which look out onto the public space, with a kind of cafe in the foreground. This is the ground floor plan in a bit more detail, so I don't need to go into too much. There's also entrances into the apartments, which are connected sometimes to these passageways, and sometimes they're connected to the block. Okay, and these long elevations, which make the edges of these courtyards, they have a kind of variety to themselves. There's kind of different rhythms. There's a ground floor of these commercial units, which have this kind of bigger scale kind of overall rhythm, but within them there are these windows which have a lot of variety and difference in them, the sort of scale of these large thick sort of framed doors and upper openable windows along the ground floor and the mezzanine, creating a variety. And then this upper level of this kind of colonnade of the loggia with these strange pentagonal columns, which are sort of randomly dividing like cells, splitting apart, which creates a sort of strangeness to the elevation. It's not a typical housing development which is repetitive. There's sort of different layers of things happening on top of each other, which makes it feel more special and linked to the idea of the kind of busy street with lots of things happening. So there's this kind of energy to that portion of the facade, and then there's also elements of the facade which are more solid. Here's a model of the internal courtyard of the building, and the reason I'm showing you the model photographs and not the photographs of the completed scheme is because the surrounding buildings haven't been built yet, so it's to give you an impression of the kind of what it will be like in 10 years time. But you have this loggia again addressing the courtyard with this canopy which projects out in front of the kindergarten, making a play space for the kindergarten, and this more of a back facade here for the residential apartments. So these are this is kind of an upper level plan. So you have these short elevations of the L block which are addressing the street and kind of have the scale of these smaller buildings, and these longer elevations which are addressing the courtyards. Here you can see that end elevation, which is kind of meeting the rhythm of these smaller buildings. You can see in the plan, most of the apartments are dual aspect, and they have these big open loggias, which are sort of like an additional room in the apartment. They're very generous and deep. They're also tall. The apartment's very tall. The building achieves a BREEAM outstanding, so it's kind of very technically performant. It's the whole block, the energy production for not only our building, but also the buildings, the kind of RAN development, the small granular buildings is done in the basement of our building. So there's kind of an energy strategy in that, and sort of you can see how the sort of thickness of the walls and the insulation, which is required to keep them well heated. So this is looking at the building under construction. This is standing on top of the Noitlings Tower in the harbour, looking south. So you can sort of see the scale of the city. It's quite low and again granular. This is another part of the master plan, which was won by Rapp+Rapp and the same developer again. So this building, which is slightly bigger than the scale of the surrounding built streets. but has a similar presence where it's on this main road and it's kind of got an internal courtyard and an external courtyard. And our building here just topping out the concrete frame under this big yellow crane. So before site works could start, there was a kind of period of archaeological exploration where they peeled back the ground, and all of this had been underneath that hostel. It was quite strange, but the sort of ruins and foundations of the monastery that was there, and they uncovered all kinds of strange things, and they even found this skeleton which they knew was a priest, and they knew that the priest was hugely overweight due to the way his hips had spread open. And I think there's a plan to relocate him somewhere in the basement of our building in the future. So the building started on site in summer 2017. So there was a period after we tendered the project where there was a kind of discussion between the client and the contractor. The contractual relationship between client and contractor and architect is a bit different in Belgium, and it involves the architect less, and there was a lot of pressure from the client to reduce the project costs. I mean, it's a very efficient building for what it does. It's about €1,000 a square meter. So there was some changes which happened to the design in that period to reduce costs, which looked at different ways of constructing it, and they had a kind of bigger implication down the road, which we'll see in a minute. But the construction of the building was very straightforward. It has these precast columns which are cast into in situ slabs, and then that's infilled with blockwork and concrete panels. So it's an expedient way to construct the sort of frame of the building, although it's a kind of bit of an idiosyncratic frame in the way that the structural engineer designed it. So maybe the interesting thing about the construction was the concrete, and this idea of the quality of the concrete. So very early on in the project, we started going to site and looking at these concrete samples for white precast concrete. So maybe I sort of missed that in my introduction, but the kind of facade is made up of these white precast concrete elements, which are held in these between these red tiles and green bricks. So the concrete's really the kind of one of the most important elements of the facade. And we turn up to site and there would be these kind of oatmeal porridge lumpy samples of pentagonal columns, which we sort of refused and condemned, and we would keep coming back, and they would make bigger pieces, but they had these sort of joints in them where they shouldn't have, and bits of wood in them, and bits of red aggregate, which are very strange. And it was we would keep going, and we'd have to keep saying that this is not satisfactory. You need to make better precast concrete. Why is this so difficult? It was really weird. I mean, precasters should be able to make precast concrete, but it was having a kind of larger effect that because all of the precast elements are sort of cast into the in situ slabs, that the building could only rise so much without having to cast these elements into it. So while things were continuing, the contractor was getting kind of more and more nervous about the program, rightfully so. And eventually this kind of bottom right-hand side piece is when we went to the precasters workshop, and they finally admitted that they had no idea what they were doing, and they had never made exposed white precast concrete before. And they were eventually removed from the project. But the program of the project had already, at this point, sort of slipped by about a year. So, yeah, I mean, the inside of the project had these kind of amazing silicon blocks, which you can put together very quickly with glue. So it was sort of rising very quickly, but also approaching a kind of problem very fast, where, as you can see in this image, which is just at the point when the first pieces of precast, the approved precast, was arriving, that the slabs are not cast on the edges whenever they're needed to make the connection between the rebar and the precast elements and the in situ slab. There's big portions of the elevation are missing. And it's all sort of trying to be built around without these precast elements. So you can see this sort of strange figure that rises out as it's sort of waiting. And then it starts to come together, perhaps at the end of 2018, where the precast is being added in retroactively. And I really like this image because it sort of has this strange, kind of peculiar or the kind of interesting compositional arrangement of the facade is kind of heightened when it's in this sort of half-built position, and the beams are kind of sailing over the internal structure, and the glass is only half there. This is the balcony, the kind of loggias being installed, all these white precast columns being held in place, waiting for the balcony above to hold them, to lock them in so that the props can be removed. It's kind of amazing. This is looking out over the external courtyard with the Wrap and Rapp building in the background. And here it is a couple of months later, when the brickwork and windows have been placed and the metal balustrades on the outside and the precast, huge precast planks above. So when all the precast elements were then placed, it had this sort of strange skeletal quality. It was really interesting. Felt very light and sort of ephemeral, sort of for a short period of time before all of the linings could be placed. All of the concrete had to go in before the bricks and tiles could be placed, which you can see here, they're starting to go in. So you can see this white precast structure, which is a kind of rhythm along the ground floor, and this more vertical rhythm above for the apartments with these odd splitting columns, and the rhythm of the windows then behind that, which is shifting at a different rhythm. Kind of the combination of all those things, I think, is quite special along these long elevations. It's quite unusual, and I think in comparison to the adjacent buildings, it's much more lively. It contributes a lot more to the setting. So here it is when it's finished. This is in summer last year. So just like that model photo I showed at the start, this is looking towards the kindergarten. So here you have this projecting canopy, which is in the courtyard. Behind that is play space, which is semi-enclosed, and then behind that again is another screen, which is the inside wall of the outside wall actually of the classrooms, with the apartments above and these connections through the building, and the entrances into the apartment with these glass boxes which hang over the entrances and are illuminated at night. This is the interior of the kindergarten, so the external play space. So it's this open air at the top, and inside the classrooms, which have these kind of playful interiors, which are supposed to be a kind of version of the exterior, I guess. These some views looking at the kind of different facade treatments of entrances into the building, or the kind of backs of the apartments with their windows set into this green brick, sort of strangely colored brick, which was they were handmade, and the guy who made them was local to the area, so he was very interested in the project. And they had both tonally and in terms of their shape, they had this huge variety in them, which was a little bit problematic for the bricklayer, but it gives the building a lot of character, as well as these tiles. This is the long elevation, this existing wall, this nice big oak tree in the foreground. Yeah, it'll be great to see it completely finished, hopefully this summer. These are the entrances into the apartments, these kind of lobbies with these black and white tiled lift cores and kind of datum around them. Again, trying to be quite playful. And the apartments themselves. So a lot of the apartments were sold off plan, and CIP's kind of USP is allowing the buyer to change the apartments, but a certain percentage of them were not sold off plan, and they were built to a kind of default design by us, which is quite simple. But I think, you know, their interiors are good, but the really special moments are the loggia. And this is the street which looks out, the elevation which looks out over the kind of street, over the rooftops of the surrounding buildings. And it's very generous space, both in its kind of length, but also its height. And yeah, I think it's a be a really amazing place to live, and still on the market if anyone's looking. And then these are kind of maybe some photographs looking at the kind of complexity of the facade and kind of the way it's trying to maybe dismantle some ideas about the structure of the elevation, or how things are, the kind of tectonic quality of it. If it's not really it's not a load-bearing facade. Everything is hung off of the primary structure. So it's quite interesting, and how all those parts come together and how it's held. I was kind of terrified in Belgium of using the cladding as a load-bearing thing. You couldn't even fix the balustrades to the brickwork. They were too worried that they would fall out. Sort of insane. But overall, the kind of quality of these sort of elevations, I think the compositional ideas really, even though there's some problems with the construction, I think the kind of compositional idea still comes through. And this is the last photo, just of that ground floor unit. And yeah, kind of just like the strangeness of it, where the structure seems to hang out over this corner, and it sort of all feels a bit uncanny in some ways, like it's going to topple over, but it's quite exciting. And when the neighboring developments are there, I think it kind of contributes to this idea of a lively street, and makes a really positive contribution to the area and to the street.
At Brickworks Vande Moortel, we make high-quality bricks, slips and clay pavers in unique colours and sizes. From our new brick lab in Belgium, we support architects in the UK and around Europe. As a partner, we collaborate with the architect to transform his vision into reality with an open mind, technical knowledge and tailor-made solutions. As a family-held company, we remain accessible at all levels, which makes our company extremely customer-focused. In all those years, we never lost our core values and stand for sustainability, quality, teamwork, and of course, our passion that we would love to share with you.